Now,
exciting.
when I listen to the kids at the science fair, what they do in biology, it's like, whoa.
Isn't it amazing? That's
yeah.
That's what I think. That's what
Yeah.
I think is so exciting about. What I think is so exciting about science today is that we're getting a chance to move forward faster than we ever have before. I do a thought experiment in my own mind. Oh, by the way, everybody.
Are we starting?
And we will
Yeah,
as soon as I see that we're. But I do a thought experiment that, okay, 40 years ago, you get a good idea, some idea. You have to send it off to some kind of a science publication to get, and then it has to be juried, right? I mean, it has to be go through the peer review process, and then it has to be, and then finally, then it'll get published, and then it'll be put into the mail, and then it'll be sent to Milan, and to where someone will be able to be a subscriber to that particular journal, and then we'll have to go to your abstract and have to do that, and suddenly you go, oh, I know how, I'm working on something very similar to that. And could give an idea, and then would send a letter to me back and would give me some insight. Except that now, today, someone can write something up and upload it and have it reviewed and have it up there by the next day in Milan. What does that do to the scientific process?
Well, that's a really good question because there are pros and cons to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary. This is Ingrid Weigand, who runs all the science fairs here in Austin, and we're going to be talking science today. I'm very interested in science and what we're doing. So you started with Austin Energy, right? And you were in marketing with Austin Energy.
Correct.
At the time.
Yeah. And I should say I co-manage the Austin Energy Regional Science Festival. It is still owned by Austin Energy. I actually hired that person.
Yes.
Best decision I ever made. They have a fair director who is in charge of all scholastics.
Yeah.
And my foundation, the Austin Science Education Foundation, does the fundraising, the recruiting of judges and volunteers, the mentor program at low-income schools, middle and high schools, and community outreach, and I help co-manage the fair. But I got involved because at the time I was the manager of marketing communications at Austin Energy.
And this was in 1998?
You
preceded it.
I joined Austin Energy in 1998, but I should go back a step. The Austin Regional Fair was founded in 1956. So it's been around for a long time.
Wonderful.
And various entities from UT to ARSC to private people have run it all this time until for whatever reason they needed to pass it on to somebody else. And at the time when I joined Austin Energy, first I was in the video department.
Yes.
I actually was the video department, I was it. There was a woman, Dr. Barbara Tenbrink, who ran the fair single-handedly. And Austin Energy had just become a sponsor, and as part of their sponsorship, they said, okay, we'll videotape it. We'll do interviews with the students. And then they turned to me and said, Ingrid, go find some students, interview them. And I remember sitting in the edit suite and running those answers from what the students had told me they were doing over and over and over until I could grasp what they were doing. And for the narration, I could sum it up in 1 or 2 sentences. And I had to ask a lot of questions.
Yes.
I do have a basic grounding in science because of my German school education.
Sure.
But as we said earlier, what the students now do in science is way beyond what they taught us in high school.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So talk about the evolution from 1998. I mean, we're talking about like within 11 years ago, today in 2018, almost 2019, there were no smartphones. This was not, I mean, there has never been a technology that has more quickly been adapted by humanity than the smartphone. And yet it's part of us. So there's a real expansion in what we can be curious about and what we can. So can you talk about that evolution from the 90s up that you'd been seeing with the with the science?
Well, first off, I should say I'm not a scientist. I have a degree
Right.
in literature.
But you
But-
are a journalist,
but
and
I'm a journalist, yes.
a journalist is an observer of the
Yes.
humanity of what we're doing. So I'm asking
Yeah.
you more. I'm asking you more
Yeah.
as Ingrid, the observer, than Ingrid, the scientist.
So everything has sped up tremendously. Knowledge just goes faster and faster. It gets shared more widely than ever before, and there are opportunities that people even 20 years ago would not have dreamt about. That is on the positive side.
Yes.
The way that information, first of all, can be gathered, and secondly, the way it can be shared and put out there is just totally astounding. And there are possibilities out there that are mind-blowing. On the other hand, because there is such a fast pace, sometimes you wonder how much review there is and how much thought goes into the development of science. And one example I was going to give you, are you familiar with Konrad Lorenz?
No.
He was a German-Austrian behavioral scientist. He did the very, very well-known experiment of raising a gosling with his children. And the gosling thought it was a child. And he came up with the whole idea of impressions and bonding.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Now you're.
So
now,
that's
now
Konrad
you-
Lorenz.
Yes, I'm understand. Thank
Yes.
you.
And he was, I didn't look this up before I came here because I hadn't thought about it, but I would say he was around in the 1930s, 40s, 50s as much.
Sure.
And I read him as a child because he was one of the first people who wrote popular science. He had a book called The Gosling Martina. And that's the gosling he had raised with his children. And I read that as a children's book, and I was so impressed. One thing that Konrad Lorenz said at the time, because already science was starting to speed up at that time, he said it used to be that you looked at inventions for one generation to see what the consequences might be.
Exactly.
We're not even talking about a year anymore. We're not even talking about months sometimes. And to give you an example of the other extreme, how fast things are going, the New Yorker, the November 23rd issue, had an article on neuroscience, of the intersection between neuroscience, computer, and engineering. And it had to do with implanting in somebody's brain a small apparatus that let them control a robotics arm. And this is something that scientists have been trying to do for a long time for people who are amputated or have injured,
Of
especially with all the war injuries. And the Department of Defense actually was funding it. So they did this experiment with a woman who was a quadriplegic, and she was able, with these implants, and they stuck out of her head like little horns, and she was very proud of them after a while. She was able to control the robotics arm to the point where she could feed herself a piece of chocolate, which had been her dream. Just the fact that because she was living in a wheelchair without any use of any limbs. She could use the joystick by using her chin to maneuver her wheelchair around. So for her, the fact that she was able to make her arm, and she came to think of it as her arm, that she was able to command it to feed her a piece of chocolate was amazing. And what the experiment was is, what is the thought process that triggers an action? What happens in your brain that tells, like you just did this with your arms.
Yes.
How did your arms know to do this? And how did your arms know to stay within the confines of your body and not go flailing out here? So something in your brain, some neurons fired and told some other part of your brain that you wanted to react. Actually, they reacted to something you heard. They sent some kind of signal down your arms and you moved your hands. And they still have not figured out what part of the brain controls what part of the body and how does this work. So the whole science experiment was, how can I, with my thought, control a robotics arm? So they were able to do this, which is wonderful. It is a huge step forward for people who are who are paralyzed or who are missing limbs. But here is the part where I'm getting a little bit concerned. They stopped the experiment with this woman, And they're now concentrating how in the future somebody in the army can use the same mind control to control a swarm of drones
Right.
in warfare.
Exactly.
So it went away from something that most people would agree is a great advancement in healing to something that could be
Sure.
very destructive. And then the question always becomes, who makes these decisions?
Precisely. And how
Yeah.
do we do it? Because everything is a double-edged sword.
Yes.
I mean, the invention of, we were able to use so much of our, you can use dynamite to blast, to create a dam, to create a reservoir, or you can use it to kill. I mean, we can use a knife in a surgeon's hand or in a murderer's hand is exactly the same tool, but it's the consciousness behind it that's going
Right,
to do that.
and with the advancement of science, what you're also getting, it's the difference between somebody wielding a knife who could be very, very dangerous. I mean, the term amok comes from people who are running, who turn
Sure.
crazy and run around with a weapon, and they kill or damage whoever is in their way.
Yep.
But give that same person an AK-47, and they're doing so much more damage.
Exactly, and so we
So-
can mitigate
Yeah.
the damage just by understanding what
Right.
are the
Right.
limits.
Because whatever the advantages in science were 200 years ago, they now have the opportunity to have so much higher consequences.
You know, and speaking of
Yeah.
consequences, because I like that word, because the consequences are again, there are positive consequences and there are negative consequences. We can understand what they are. The kids that you see, are you seeing a broadening in their curiosity and the kinds of ideas that they're bringing to the science fair, the kinds of things that they're interested in doing? Are you watching a broadening of that, Ingrid?
Oh, they always do. So one thing that we see with students is that they are very, very aware of what's going on in the environment around them. So for an example, when we had the fires in Bastrop,
Yes.
we had a lot of projects the following year in plant sciences that
Yes.
had to do with how quickly can something burn out of a ground soil that had been burned. When we had the flooding in Del Valley, we had a lot of projects about how do you control water, how do you control floods. So students, middle and high school, and sometimes at the elementary level, they react to what's around. We get a lot of projects that have to do with environmental science, that have to do with renewable energy, that research cancer, that are looking for alternative homeopathic ways of maybe treating certain diseases. We're getting behavioral projects that are dealing with drug addiction, how to combat that. So at that age, it's all still thinking about what's possible, and it's pretty much, I would say, 105% positive. How can I make the world better?
How wonderful! And
Yeah.
so, what ages are that get involved in the science fair?
Our regional fair takes the winners from local schools, and we cover 12 surrounding counties, 23 school districts, private, public, charter, homeschools. We take them from 3rd grade through 12th grade. So we run an elementary fair, which is 3rd through 6th grade, because some elementary schools in Austin go through 6th grade. And then we run a junior, which is middle school, and a senior fair, high school, on a different day.
Well, I loved watching the video, the last video that
Yeah.
you put up, in which I encourage anyone, please take a look at this, take a look at the video, because just listening to the kids articulate what they're postulating and what postulating that they're making, and then the tests that they're running, and it's so hopeful. I mean, it really
is.
brings.
Yeah. And typically the projects that do the best are those that are grounded in some personal experience. So a student might have somebody in the family who suffers from diabetes.
Right.
So they want to do something. They want to do a test or a cure. At that level, they're all still talking about cures to everything.
Absolutely.
The most popular one is to find a cure for cancer.
Right.
So if they have a personal connection, there is a tremendous involvement on the part of the student.
Yep.
And what we like about it is that at that age, they still are not aware of limitations or boundaries.
Yes.
Especially at the elementary school. They just think, first of all, nothing has ever been done before. They're the first ones who are discovering that you can throw a magnet in the freezer or boil it, and is there a difference in how it then acts to other magnets?
Exactly.
They're the very first ones who ever did this. And secondly, they have no idea that there's some things they can't do.
How lovely.
Which is really wonderful.
I think about that because what are the things that I have argued myself out of? And saying, oh, that's not possible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not. Oh, you know,
Yeah.
that's really too hard. That's really not something that I even want to think about. When is that true? And that's what I get from children. That's one of the things that I love about being able to have adult and children mix, because we get an opportunity to be able to learn from one another and to be able to see, well, what are the things that I have that I can still gain from that, and that excites me about what you're doing.
And I want to give you another example on this. There is a wonderful documentary out right now. It's called Science Fair. It's distributed by National Geographic, and I think it's just finishing its theatrical run, so it'll be out on some kind of streaming service.
Wonderful.
But there is one student that they featured who was at the International Science Fair, and I actually saw him when he won. So at the International Science Fair, to which the best students from each regional and state fair advance, they always select the very, very top prize is the Gordon E. Moore Award, the founder of Intel. It's a $75,000 cash prize to the very best of the entire 1,700 students from over 78 countries who participate. Goes to one student.
Wow.
Or maybe
so it's like a
one
MacArthur Genius Grant.
So the student who won in 2016 was either a freshman or a sophomore. And he had developed a strip that could detect pancreatic cancer in hours and cost something like 10 cents to develop. And he had done that because, and I have to say, he won and he got a lot of publicity.
Yes.
And he is out there and he's still experimenting. It didn't work quite as well as he thought it would. It's still in development.
Yes.
But the fact is that those tests used to take a long time, were extremely expensive. And when he first started, because somebody whom he really loved died from pancreatic cancer, and he said, how come nobody tested for that when he first became sick? And he was told, because tests are expensive, they take a long time. And he took 2 years, and I forgot how many labs and doctors he approached. It must have been hundreds that he wrote to, emailed to. He was told, can't do this, not possible, not talking to a high school student, da-da-da-da. He developed a test.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't going to take no for an answer.
But that's what I think that we can do, because I am very hopeful about where we're going. I'm including. I mean, I love the idea of how we're bringing science, so much of the science. It just astounds me. I have a dear friend of mine, Graham Bullen, who is a historical fiction writer, and he's in Scotland, and we talk once a week on the Skype, and to know that when I say a word, it goes into the computer and it disassembles and puts it into little packets, disassembles that and takes it, sends it underneath the ocean, and it goes back and goes into his computer, reassembles from those packets, and comes out in nearly real time. How is that not magic?
It is magic, and you always wonder, did Star Trek cause all that? Did somebody look at Star Trek or read the Harry Potter books and say, that's what I'm going to do?
Exactly, and that's what I think that's where I think the inspiration and the kids today can have a greater, if we're allowed now. Getting into the schools, there is a greater emphasis into the STEM training, right? And that we're the science, technology, and engineering and math. Are you seeing that?
Yes, there is. But there is also, because of the educational system, there is a huge emphasis on tests. And the scores will determine how a school is rated.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what we see in the classroom is a concentration on learning things that can be checked off in a multiple choice box.
Exactly. That's not critical thinking.
Which is not critical thinking. So the reason we like science fair, and I should give a shout out to the teachers, because
Yes.
those who do science fair do not get extra payment for that. A lot of them do it during lunchtime or before class or after class, give their students a chance to meet. There are some lucky schools that incorporate it in their curriculum, but a lot of the teachers do it outside of their regular responsibilities.
Wow.
So doing a science fair project leads to thinking outside the box. It is not what you can read and then check off a box. They really have to think things through. It also means that they have to learn how to project plan. So for example, this is my favorite speech to a middle school student who don't know anything about time management.
Yes.
So here it is, we're in November. The fair submission deadline is January 31st.
Wonderful.
You have to get all your research plan written, etc., before you may even start. You have to have permission from somebody before you can start. And you want to grow plants and see whether they go better with this fertilizer, that fertilizer, no fertilizer whatsoever. How long does it take for that plant to grow? Okay, it takes 3 weeks, meaning you have to have your result by then. When do you need to start if it takes 3 weeks for your plants to grow? Which to a middle school student is a revelation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
you're teaching, but time management and project management are such
They are so
big
important.
skills to
Right.
have in our lives.
Yeah, the other thing, and pretty much every single student hates this part, is the documentation.
Mhm.
But if you do not learn how to write what it is that you're trying to do
Yeah.
and how you're going to do it, and then after you are done, if you cannot write an abstract that gives an overview of what you were trying to do, how you did it, what you learned, there are not many people that will listen to you when you have an invention.
Exactly.
And so the students have to learn a whole bunch of things in addition to doing the experiment, which is all they want to do. So after they've written their research plan, they have all their permissions, they do their projects, they get to do the board, which they love. Every student loves doing a board. But then they come to our fair and they talk to judges. And Donna is one of our judges.
Donna Cosper.
Donna Cosper,
our
yes.
executive producer.
Yes. And I have to get about 350 judges just for middle and high school. And I have to get judges who are subject matter experts in 17 different science categories. And it ranges from animal sciences to behavioral to chemistry to biomedical to health to 3 different engineering categories, 2 different environmental categories, robotics, physics, plant sciences. Because when a student submits a project in one of those categories, the judges who talk to that student need to know more than the student does. Now, in middle school,
Absolutely.
that's manageable.
Sure.
Basically, any scientist can judge any category in middle school because it's basic science.
Absolutely.
But when you get to high school, some of the projects we get, especially in the last grade of high school, you better know your
Yeah.
stuff.
There's got to be a cross-pollination
Yeah.
there, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the scientists that get a chance to, and the engineers and mathematicians that get a chance to work in this, they get inspired by the kids
Right.
who are, so there's a wonderful synergy there.
Right, and a lot of the judges who come back, we have quite a few returning judges, so I need 350 judges for the middle and high school. We do minimum 3 judges per project, and they judge and then form consensus of who
Yes.
should be first, second, third. So it's a lengthy process. But at this point, I have about 140 judges. I did my first call, and about 120 of those are returning judges. And some of them have judged for longer than 10 years, and they basically come back because they love the interaction with the students, and they always tell me it gives them hope.
Yes.
Right. So, and those are the kind of people we want to recruit, because there are people who are stricter and say, you know, you should have known this, you should have done this. That's not what I need. What I need is people that listen, understand what the student has done, and give encouragement.
Yes.
And we do every year. We have some students who did not did not quite get the paperwork right, so they cannot advance, or they're doing it for the first time, or there's some kind of limitation. We tell the judges which those projects are, and we expect them to be extra kind, Because if somebody comes for the first time and does not have the confidence to begin with, they don't need to be told that they did something wrong. They need to be told that, yes, I see what you did. I really appreciate your effort.
Yes.
And I hope you will continue in the field.
Exactly. And that's where
Yeah.
I think that the entire science and positive psychology and appreciative inquiry, to be
Yeah.
able to inquire what went right, what did you
Right.
do that actually ended up developing, digging deeper, making this, to see what was going right. Because if you
Right.
can find that their curiosity, what was your original intent, and
Yeah.
then suddenly it opens up. I mean, it opens up, it becomes a learning experience for
It
everybody.
does. And speaking of what did you do right, that's another thing we have to overcome with, especially with middle school students. They have to have a hypothesis in the beginning. Here's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
If they were wrong, they are heartbroken. And part of the learning experience is like, no, if you're wrong, you just learned something.
What did
You
we
learned-
learn? We learned
We learned that if I do this and that, I'm not going to get this, I got this. Why did I get this? Why did I end up here? And every year at the International Science Fair, which is our reward every year, we get to take our top winners to the International Science Fair, which is 5 days of
Right.
amazing students. There is a Nobel laureate panel, and students can ask questions. They're pre-selected, and they will answer. And it doesn't matter what the students answer. The laureates have a tremendous amount of fun, and they just go and tell stories, war
Yes.
stories.
Yes.
But every year, at least one of them will say, the best inventions are those that were accidental. We were expecting X and we got Z, and everybody scratched their head and said, why did we end up with Z? What happened here?
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
what we and you know, this is such an interesting time about how we're using machines. So are the students able to use I know we're not quite at artificial intelligence, but so much that we're able to use computers to do modeling, to do the kinds of work, and that it's moving in that in that area. Are you seeing a great deal of interest in that?
It totally depends on the school and the school district and the resources available to the
Isn't
school. There
that
is
the
a
truth?
huge difference between a well-funded school and a not well-funded school.
Yeah.
There is also a huge difference between students who have parents who are professionals, who have access to labs, or even if they
Yep.
don't have access to labs, they know somebody who does, or who give their students the confidence to call UT and just cold call and say, I'm investigating this, can I come to your lab?
Exactly.
And who have the confidence to be rejected 10 times, 15 times and keep calling. And
I-
then you have the other students whose parents are not professionals,
Nope.
who do not know that this is a possibility for them.
Even knowing it's a possibility, Ingrid, and
Which is
that's
huge.
The to know Bill Gates talks about how, because he happened to be in that particular school district, in that particular place of affluence, that allowed him to have an early introduction to the beginnings of computing, allowed him to then go on and to be part of the Microsoft experiment, about what he did. But that's because he was at a place where he intersected at that
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
effort.
So you can always say that any student could reach a certain goal, but that's really not true. You have to have the environment. You have to
Exactly.
have the opportunities. You have to have the encouragement. And there are always some students who will thrive despite all the obstacles,
Exactly.
but they are the exceptions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. About
Yeah.
there are people that will say about negative encouragement, and then say that, oh well,
Are we done?
yeah, that was wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you.
That was a very quick half hour.
You're being on the side of the camera.
I did. I normally don't do this other thing.
Well, I'll thank you for that and giving me an opportunity to.
Was it okay? Well, I had a very good time.
All right.
change and be another
I'm
person.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll be, yes, I'll
Donna,
go,
for
I'll see if I'll
inviting
be
me.
a better
Oh,
person.
thank you so much.
All right.
He was the moderator for that STEM panel.
Oh, was
that-
he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't tell me
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, he maybe didn't realize that you helped me to get some people. I forgot to mention it to you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, so my student never made it, right?
Right, but
Yeah.
we got Rucha.
You get Rucha. Oh, you did get
Yeah.
Rucha. Yes, oh, Rucha is lovely.
Oh, that's the
Yeah,
student we're
yeah.
talking about. Okay.
No, no, there was another student I had gotten
The
before.
boy.
She couldn't. Yeah, the boy couldn't, but Rucha made it,
Yeah.
and she is. Oh, I like her. She's
Oh my gosh,
that
she
child is
was
going to go
great.
places. Oh yeah,
What about that boy? I guess he's a man now, but
he's a man now. From that whole crowd, they were all intellectual students. They're all ended up at Harvard, MIT. These are.
and then the other ones
Okay, I think the best way to do this would be to go up the front of the shirt. So if you want to thread that real quick. Up through there, yeah. Awesome. We should just be able to clip it right. I forget which way close that is.
well, we'll show you how to do
We'll flip it on just a little bit.
I moved it. I was noticing that it's too bad our socks don't show they kind of match.
Look at what we did.
How about that?
Yeah. And please, I appreciate that that I'm getting a chance to do the interview with you, the conversation with you third, because I have no idea of all the people that I have interviewed. I have no idea what I want to talk about with you. It's that open. I'm that
Keep going.
good. Dakota, pronounce your last name for me again.
dshehaman.
dshehaman. dshehaman. dshehaman.
Good.
I'm going to work on it. dshehaman. Dakota. dshehaman.
Yeah.
What a graceful time that we've incarnated to be here on the path and connect up on this time. I'm really. I've known that I was a spiritual person having a human experience for much of my life, and it really there's a synchronicity to life and to getting a chance to meet you at this time. I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, I feel the same. Thank you.
You, this is Dakota dshehaman. How'd I do?
Very good.
Nice, huh? Nice. How did you choose that to be your name?
Well, I've got several answers to that. I was Dakota for a while. It's not my birth name, and then I was my birth name for a while. And someone came to me and said, I just can't picture you with this name. It doesn't seem like the right name for you. And I said, no, that's because it's not. And so I gave them Dakota, and they said, yes, that's it. So
Nice.
that's one of the answers. My last name has many stories behind it. I've had many names in my lifetime.
Different incarnations.
That's right. And one of my children, when he was about 5, he said to me, I wonder what my name is going to be when I grow up. And I just loved that. That was beautiful to me, that they understood that we become different people, we evolve, and having a name that changes with that seems appropriate, and it was normal for them.
And I think, and that's the thing that excites me about understanding what normal is, because what I grew up thinking that I was the one broken.
I think a lot of people do.
Exactly.
Yes.
That was it. Everybody else has it figured out. They got the book, the secret. But I didn't, and I didn't realize this, and so it really kicked off a lot of self-loathing, a lot of that undercore that you have to heal through, and all that. And you've done that. You've come through a lot of healing and growing in your life.
Yes, I think so.
And meditation, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this concept, because here and now we're having this conversation at the end of 2018 as far as the Gregorian calendar is concerned, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, so we're here at the end of 2018, and so what is this time? And what does it mean for us? You have a family, and they live in
Northern Wisconsin.
northern Wisconsin.
Right now.
And what is happening there? Because I'm interested in that, and I want to groove into how meditation has led you into that, and tell me a little. Give us some pictures of what life is like there.
Well, we first came to Northern Wisconsin as part of a wilderness immersion program.
And what was that? What is that?
That was through Teaching Drum Outdoor School in Northern Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And they have a program called the Wilderness Guide Program, which is a 1-year or 11-month wilderness immersion program. And typically it's done with adults,
Mhm.
and has been for many years.
And it's self. I mean, the words. It's you immerse yourself in the wilderness.
Yes, there's a school base, and they have a camp that's about 8 miles away that is surrounded by wilderness
Mm-hmm.
and on a lake, and they own some property there. And the students are called seekers, and we go out, we walk out to the camp with whatever gear we're permitted, and it's very simple, very, very little other than the basics, and some years it's less than the basics, significantly less than the basics. Our year was the first and only program of its kind, as far as I know, ever to exist in the world anywhere in time, and that was the family year-long program, where they specifically were looking for families with kids, and the kids in our group, our clan, ranged from, I believe it was 2 to 14, and I think we had 3 2-year-olds, or maybe, and a 3-year-old, something like that. We started out with 42 people, and 17 of those were children. And we learned to work together. We had magnificent guidance from the school about everything from parenting to how to bathe in the winter time. to lost proofing, to cooking without pots, things like that, starting fires. They have a guardian program that some of the people could choose to be in, that learned more of the wilderness skills and guiding that many people think of when they think of it wasn't really a wilderness skills program so much as it was learning to relate to nature in a different way and relate to each other with what nature gives us. And so anyway, you asked me about being in northern Wisconsin. That's what brought us there. We don't live in that program now. I mean, we have a house, and most of my children's lives we lived off grid. We lived in some houses that we built. We lived in a yurt for a year with 12 goats underneath. Helped keep us warm. That was in Northern California. My kids have had a very eclectic life and a pretty simple one. I homeschooled them up until a couple of years ago, and that included all sorts of adventures, primitive skills gatherings, and goat walking in the wilderness for weeks at a time in the summer times with goats with packs, and traveling to a lot of different places and seeing a lot of different things. And
well, what did it teach you? How did they relate? How, when you look at the kids and your own consciousness in this 21st century smartphone, globally interconnected world, and you see that, and then you see this experience, how do these two things live together in your consciousness and your observations? What kinds of awarenesses are coming up from your experience, Dakota?
well, how they integrate within me and how they integrate within my family is very different. So my kids are all teenagers now, and of course,
the easy years.
They right. Well, and maybe harder for me in some ways because I'm having to do a real personality adjustment to allow them to be the people they want to be. And up until now, they could be the people that I wanted them to be, and more or less. But they're not willing to milk goats anymore, and that's okay. And they have other things that they're exploring, and I'm trying to support them with that. And for years I had no phone at all, and that infuriated everybody who knew me and wanted to be in touch. I did email occasionally from the library, and I would be told things like, well, you can't live in the world today without a cell phone.
Yeah.
And well, I didn't even have a house phone until a few years back, and I just a couple months ago bit the bullet and got a cell phone, and yeah. And a couple of days ago, I had just flown into Austin, and two of my sons were at a wrestling meet that evening, and being able to text them and find out about their wrestling meet and send them a couple photos from where I was in Austin was beautiful. I loved it, and I was able to be in two places at one time, and so it definitely has a value. And at the same time, it's really important to me never to imagine that I need that, because I know for sure I don't. And I think temporarily, while my kids are going through this age, I'm sort of going through a little growth stage in learning to balance with it, but I'm never going to be a social media junkie, that's for sure.
Yes. Well, I because I have found myself that I can get hooked into fairly easily. I can get hooked into something, and before I even realize that I'm hooked. So that, I mean, that's part of the awareness and my wanting to continue to be more mindful. In the work I do communication coaching, and I'm seeing that there is a broad across businesses, there is a movement toward mindfulness. And so, I mean, I look at it like if we have a gradient, as opposed to an on-off switch, so that if I can just move one tiny incremental toward the one, from like 0 to 1, so that if I can move in incrementally up there, I can be more mindful. And that's a much more resonant concept with me. You pulled into mindfulness and meditation. How did you do that?
Well,
terrible question, by the way. I understand that's
well,
so broad, but
it is a
I
very
need
broad
you to.
question.
What I mean, I just want you to know I know the absurdity of the question I just asked. Help me to ask a better question. Help me a route into that will make some
well,
kind of.
how I got into mindfulness and how I got into meditation aren't necessarily the same thing. I do practice Vipassana meditation, which is taught through several organizations. The one that I am involved with is the teacher is the late S.N. Goenka, and it's all on audio and videotape, and it's the same every course. And they do initially for new students, they do 10-day courses, and there are several centers in the United States and many camps, and they have courses going year-round. And it's a phenomenal organization. It's in this country, it's entirely volunteer-based and donation-based, and I can't say enough good things about it. But that's not.
And so, how does someone get to get connected with that?
There's a website. I believe it's dhamma.org.
Good. Well, we'll put that on the
Yeah.
screen. All right. So go ahead now. Continue.
My first experience with Vipassana was a teacher when I was a teenager and in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very difficult adolescence and would be overwhelmed with what I now see as just reactivity to emotional states, hormonal states, whatever, reactivity to different things that would come up, and I didn't know what to do with it. And of course, you know, that's the defining quality of adolescence, is trying to figure out what to do with that energy.
Yeah.
And I flailed. I was very difficult, I'm sure, for the people around me, and certainly very difficult for myself. And
in your story that I read, the part that you allowed me to read, I mean, because there was a lot of adventuring in of being willing to say, okay, well, I'm going to go out and take a flyer on this and see what I can do on that. Is that passion to explore? Is that an essentialness? It's so essential to the story that I was reading.
Sure. It's a passion to explore nature and self, and that's all kind of the same thing.
Absolutely.
And this teacher that I was talking about is Stephen Levine, and we've talked a little bit about him. And he didn't actually teach Vipassana meditation. He was teaching conscious living and conscious dying, and he referred to his practice and a little bit to the technique just as experiencing physical sensations. And so I had no formal training, and it wasn't anything like the courses that I later went to. I would just, when I started feeling that feeling of overwhelm, of I wasn't in control anymore, I would just sit down on the bed and feel my physical sensations. And it was mind-blowing for me how that transformed the situation. It put me back in control. And I did that for probably a decade before I actually sat a regular course. And
What an amazing experience. Just when as you're speaking of that, I can think of maybe 40 times in the last week or more when I have reacted rather than sat and experienced the emotions that are happening at that moment.
Sure. I probably can too.
But that's all. I mean, I love Dennis Tardan, work in progress.
Right?
I have not grown. I'm merely growing. I mean, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's part of where I'm going. So how have your kids returned from that experience and been able to experience the hustle and bustle and the modern and return from that immersion? Was there something like when you come up out of the deep, you have to have some type of like you get the bends if you don't.
You're talking about the wilderness immersion. Yeah. Well, they did guide us very well in the last moon of the program. That we had a lot of workshops on reemerging, if you will, into the culture. It's definitely a culture shock.
Mm-hmm.
I think much more so for the adults. The kids were so much more pliable, so much more able to adapt to, I think that if I had...
Great word, pliable.
Yes. I think if I had waited another year, they would not have been able to do the program. I believe they were 7 to 11 years old when we first did it. And they were open to it. They didn't really know what was going to happen. I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I knew enough to be afraid. I'm afraid of mosquitoes, or I'm going to be too cold, or I have to live in a little hut with people I don't know, and whatever
Sure.
the fear is. And they didn't have that fear. They just went into it and experienced it and made it their own. And it was the same way coming back, more or less. In many ways, we had gone into the experience having lived a more simple life than a lot of the people there.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways, they were actually moving more into an American lifestyle, moving into the woods. I mean, some ways not, but most ways not. But a few things, like once a month, we were allowed to go into the center and use the phones and the computers to do business. And they had that set up for programs of adults. They hadn't really structured it around children. And so, of course, the kids wanted to go in and use it for video games or something that my kids had no experience with. So they actually learned to appreciate video games while we were in a wilderness immersion program, which was a little backwards.
What I learned from my...
But, it was once a month. And the other part of that is that Teaching Drum was very interested in us adopting a more native, if you will, way of both parenting and relating to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship being really the initial primitive skill, which most people don't even think about.
I love that you say that, because one of the things what I'm so clear on is that we as humans are we're tribal. That's where I think that this sense of community that we need. We need that sense of community, that sense of accountability, that sense of together. We're all in this together. That's important. That I'm not sure that that these single family separate dwellings that we have gotten ourselves into in our the affluenza that has happened here. I'm not sure that that's how we're wired.
Yes. And I would agree with that. That's been a lot on my mind lately, talking about the difference between living a more simple lifestyle as opposed to using technology to take care of the ails of our culture. And I was talking this morning actually about how when I was a teenager, when I became a legal adult, it was suddenly overwhelming to me that I was responsible to take care of myself. I'm suddenly medically, financially, job, whatever. It's you know, I'm on my own, and I realized very quickly that rather than try to dance harder to do what our culture says everyone should want, to create that I wanted to learn to live within the simplicity that I could manage comfortably and happily, and that went right along with the meditation and my interest in being close to nature. And
that fascinates me, because what that says to me is that you're not going to let it be the owner of you. You're putting it in the order that technology serves you. You're not going to serve
yes.
technology. So it's an order of operations rather than that, because it's so easily, so quickly, that I'll find that I find in the evenings, like at the end of a workday, that no matter how many emails I answer, I can always think of 2 or 3 more. It's never enough. And that's a concept that I would like to explore. Could we talk about what the word? Do you think about what does the word enough mean? I ask this of someone because I work with some very highly successful monetarily and career-wise people, and I ask them, do you have a concept of what enough would be? When would you? Pardon?
And do they?
No, and that's but that's something that I've been trying to explore, is so that I would know when I got there. How would I know? How would I know when I have enough money? And so my wife Melissa and I have discussed this, and we've come up with a figure that anything that we know that if we had this much in our savings accounts and our business and checking accounts and this much in a CD, anything over that, with our basic expenses paid, everything over that would spill over, we're going to just give away. So we know we actually have a figure, we actually have a number, so we'll know when we get there. That's enough for us. And it wouldn't matter to me. And when I ask, I try to make this without judgment, that not everyone's going to have the same number. Some person might say 5 billion. Okay, but at least you'll know it.
Right.
Warren Buffett knows it. Warren knows when he's gotten there. Bill Gates knew it. He knows when he's gotten there. Why can't the rest of us?
Well, the answer to your question about enough is, for me, is it's what we're content with. It's what we're happy with. And once you get into meditating, it becomes really clear that human nature is there's never enough, and it's a bottomless hole, there's part of the teaching, the meditation teaching that I do is about how when we get one thing, that prompts us to be discontent with it.
Yes.
And to need something more, something
Yes.
bigger. And the whole process of meditation is learning to meet what you're given and accept it and appreciate it for what it is. The other answer I have to that question is, a couple of years ago, I had a dream message, and we were taught during the wilderness program to work with our dreams in a different way, and it became very much a part of life. Not just this is a dream and this is real life, but the whole thing is real life. And I have taken that much further in that I work with real waking life as I do with my dreams to receive the messages that are coming similarly to both venues. And so I received a dream message that was, I had been questioning about the difference between want and need. And the message was, if it happens, then it's a need. And that need can only be ascertained in the present. And with that, there's this incredible trust that whatever I'm getting, that is what I need. And there's a contentment that comes with that. And I can be happy with anything. I've been through some really extreme turmoil and ups and downs and here and there in my life, and if I can find the gift in it, and there is a gift in every little speck of it, because it's completely designed for me. It's perfect for me. And as long as I know that and I hold that, I will find the gift, and I'm content, and it's enough. It's always enough. And that doesn't make me complacent.
Can you get a couple of
done?
shots while we're talking?
Yep.
Go ahead.
It doesn't make me complacent. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to make an effort to keep improving and showing compassion.
I think it's the. I think it's
Y'all
the.
were awesome.
I think.
Thank you.
I think it is more, and that's the only. I want